that perhaps the relationship between woman and knowledge is not the same as for men and knowledge. That it is not as recommended, as important, or as we have said, as necessary for women to acquire knowledge as it is for men to acquire knowledge.
Is that first, not all the passages are considered authentic by scholars. There are passages that are very, very questionable, and all serious scholars consider them to be not authentic, and therefore don't even spend any time addressing or commenting them. For instance, by showing that these passages emerge at specific points in history, they were never there in previous centuries, no one ever relied on them, no one ever quoted them, no one ever used them or extracted from them practical principles, and so on and so forth. But you also have passages that, even though perhaps not unanimously accepted by all, have been accepted, including passages in the Shia school, including passages in Nahj al-Balagha, for instance, and elsewhere, where there seems to be an indication, directly or indirectly, that the relationship between woman and reason or woman and knowledge is not the same as between men and knowledge. And in short, these passages are usually, if this is how they are understood, then it is easy to say, without going into the whole discussion now, it's easy to say for us to demonstrate that this is a misunderstanding of these passages. That there is a much more accurate, much more objective, cohesive and consistent way of understanding these passages with the rest of the passages, with the rest of, let's call it the Islamic theory, or how Islam deals with the question of woman and knowledge, or woman and reason. Some misconceptions may have also stemmed from the discussion that is at a much more grammatical level, at a much more linguistic level, that unfortunately, because it is being addressed, it is being looked at by people who do not have the linguistic or the grammatical background, they misunderstand these passages to say, for instance, that it is only men who are being exhorted or being encouraged, for instance, to go and seek knowledge. When in reality, these passages are talking about every person, and they are to be treated as generic passages and generic teachings. All of these, inshallah, are all arguments and studies about which scholars have written a lot and explained a lot and commented a lot, and perhaps we will have opportunities to come back to this and go into detail in all of these arguments and all of these dimensions of the discussion. We want to look at it from a different angle. Look at things a little bit more practically. But before, inshallah, for all of us who have been attending these lectures, whether you have attended all of them or part of them, we are now at lecture, I think, 88, 89, somewhere around that number, where we have been talking specifically about knowledge and reason in Islam. And until now, we have gone through dozens of verses of the Holy Quran and hundreds upon hundreds of narrations related to this theme. And not once did we find a narration that gives us any indication, any hint, that this is exclusively for men, that one gender is superior to the other when it comes to acquiring knowledge, its importance, its necessity. We didn't find a single passage even remotely hinting to anything falling in that vein. We're not done, but I assure you that we won't find any either. We still have a way to go for the rest of this theme, to finish this theme, and we are not going to run into any narrations or any verses of the Holy Quran that are going to say, for instance, this is only encouraged or a necessity for men, for instance, to go and learn, seek knowledge, and use knowledge. In fact, we saw the opposite. We saw explicit mentions of women having to learn. And we saw explicit mentions of women coming to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and inshallah later we will see explicit mentions of many women coming to the Imams to learn from the Imams. One of the hadith that we have gone through, perhaps more than once we've used this hadith, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, أتى نساء إلى بعض نساء النبي صلى الله عليه وآله فحدثنها فقالت لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله إن هؤلاء نسوة جئن يسألنك عن شيء يستحيين من ذكره قال ليسألن عما شئن فإن الله لا يستحيي من الحق. So, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, some woman, a group of women, came to one of the women, so it could be the daughter of the Holy Prophet, one of his wives of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, to speak to her. So she told the Prophet, these women have come to ask you about certain matters, but they are too shy to mention them. He replied, let them ask whatever they want, for God is not shy from the truth. Which is an indication of the type of environment that it was, where clearly the women are coming directly to the Holy Prophet. There is no intermediary, including no intermediary of men between them. They come to learn from the Holy Prophet, and even for things that may seem to be sensitive, controversial, perhaps it's not appropriate, we're not sure what's the proper etiquette, especially with the Messenger of God, how are we to address these things? The Holy Prophet is saying, let them ask, let them come and learn. There's no embarrassment, there's nothing to be shy about, this is to learn the truth. Come and learn the truth. So these are clear indications that not only is this in general applicable to all, but we have clear, this was just one example, we have seen a few of these, where the Holy Prophet ﷺ or the Imams are dealing directly with women, and it is in this capacity of teaching, specifically teaching religion, and they are in a function of learning religion, seeking knowledge. And of course we have the general hadith that we spend a little bit of time on at the beginning of the series, that we all know, we all learn from a very young age in our religion. طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم, and in the other version, على كل مسلم ومسلمة. The seeking of knowledge is obligatory, is incumbent upon every Muslim, man and woman. But even if the hadith did not say man and woman, upon every Muslim should be sufficient. The version of the hadith, because it exists in both versions, the version of the hadith that has both على كل مسلم ومسلمة is making an extra point to make sure that perhaps in that environment and in that culture, in that society, it may be understood that this is a seeking of knowledge, and seeking of knowledge does not really apply to women. So in this case, the Holy Prophet went out of his way to make sure that I'm really talking about a universal teaching here that applies to men and women equally. So I will mention women explicitly just to remove the ambiguity. Okay, so inshallah all of this is clear. Now I said I'm going to try to look at the topic in a little bit more of a practical way. And what I mean by this is that beyond what we may find in the verses of the Holy Quran, beyond what we may find in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, another way to approach this is simply to look at Muslim women throughout history. Now, we have to make some choices, because that would be a very tall order and task to go through for a short lecture. So I made some quick choices. The first choice that I made is that I was not going to look at specifically women in the households of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, because it may be said that these are special women. They live in too close a proximity to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. They are perhaps women who belong to the households. They may not be directly of the household of the Holy Prophet in the technical sense, in the theological sense, but they are still very close to, in proximity to, the infallibles, the Holy Prophet and the Imams. And so this might be used as a pretext. These are not regular, normal women. How can we compare ourselves to them? Or how can we use them as the role model? They're special, they're different, they're distinguished. And perhaps, even if we look at the close companions to the Imams, to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the same thing may be said. So I explicitly looked at other women after the time of the Imams. Here I had to make choices. What do we focus on? Do we just look at Muslim women throughout Islamic history in general? We could. And this would be a very worthwhile project, a very worthwhile study. And inshallah, towards the end, we're going to see that there are now efforts being made specifically to address this question. But I wanted to focus a little bit more so that we arrive at a stronger argument. It's not in general how Muslim women have had a relationship and what type of relationship they have had with knowledge and reason. I have looked specifically at the most technical, the most advanced levels of knowledge. In that world, the difficulty to do this, in today's world, let's start with today's world, because that's what we're comparing it with and that's what we know. We have things like institutions of higher learning. So you have to be done at least your primary, elementary, middle schooling. You finish your high school, and then you do post-secondary, right? And so you go to college, you go to university. At university, for instance, you can get a BA or an MA or a PhD. The classification is clear, and so it's easy to be able to say what level of schooling or academic expertise, knowledge expertise there is around a topic. But in those times that didn't exist. There is no official formal schooling in that way. So how do I show, that's what I'm trying to do, that in the Islamic world, learning knowledge was still considered something very serious, and many, many women took this very seriously. This was a very clear line of activity for many of them. And many of them achieved the highest levels of, the highest standards of acquiring knowledge and using knowledge. And believe it or not, the best way to do this is to go back to Islamic sciences, where from day one, Muslim scholars, they started to create a very clear structure around the disciplines and acquiring those disciplines, which allows you to also recognize and be able to tell if someone is a beginner, or are they maybe an intermediate level student, or are they a very advanced student, or they have become an expert and now they are teaching others to become experts. And there's a whole structure around this. And in general, one of the ways to know this is, for instance, the whole system of what is called ijazat. You are given a license or a certificate to recognize what you have specifically studied and what level you have achieved in your studies. So that when a teacher gives you an ijazah, when the teacher gives you an ijazah, it basically means that you have completed that curriculum. There's nothing left to teach with regards to this topic, that you have gone through the curriculum for, let's say, fiqh or hadith, and so on and so forth. Another issue that I know these are all introductory context remarks, but they make the discussion a lot easier afterwards. Another issue that we may run into is that, generally speaking, people did not document their lives. So it's difficult for us to go back and see who studied what and achieved what. But there is a category of people a group of people where there is a lot more documentation available. Because there is a necessity and because of the nature of how they work and how they live their lives. And that group, that category of people is the scholars. Because in that world and in their internal culture, everything relies on documenting what you are learning and using licenses and certificates and recognition of what you have actually learned and from whom and at what time and in what way and so on and so forth. All of this is detailed in your ijazah, when you receive an ijazah. So this has become the normal culture in the world of scholarship in Islam, from day one. And that's why you see the ijazat go all the way back to the beginning, to the earliest times in Islamic history. And so if we focus on the world of scholars themselves, we should be in a world where things have a lot more chances of being documented than elsewhere. And if we're talking about people who have achieved such a level of understanding that they are now achieving, that they are now being granted, securing an ijazah, then we know that we're talking about the highest level of scholarship at that time. So this is the benefit of looking specifically at that category. This discussion, as we said, if we wanted to spend more time, we could easily have a whole series just about this. But this is just to set the general principles, then it's easy for us to go and do the research and find many more examples. So with this in mind, all that I wanted to do today is to give a few examples, to go through the centuries, and to give a few examples among many, many examples, and I'm going to come back to this point at the end, of women who achieved these highest levels of education. Now, of course, this should go without saying, but this is not exclusive to this. This is we would say, the methodological point of view that we have taken to focus on the lives of scholars. And I think it's important to say this because for our benefit here and now, we're looking for things that are documented. And we said this is the easiest way to find this. But we could also add to this that, of course, we understand that if someone grows up in a family, in a household of scholarship, that there are a lot more chances of acquiring knowledge, of having access to knowledge and choosing, if we want to become a scholar, whether you're a man or a woman. We understand this. That's clearly the case. And inshallah, we're going to come back to this at the end to extract other wisdoms from this, other things to keep in mind, depending on where we are in our lives. Okay, so we understand this. There's a lot more points to cover here, but I think it's enough to go into the topic. So a few examples of women, and here I am focusing on the Shia tradition. And I'm going to come back to this point at the end. If we go to the 300s, we're now talking Hijri years. We're now in year 1445, so we're talking about 1,100 years ago. Two of the daughters of Sheikh al-Tusi were considered to be high-ranking scholars with ijazat. And it is said, inshallah, we're going to come back to this a little bit more, it is said, even though there is a disagreement between some of the scholars whether this is the case or not, it is said, in fact, one of them became the grandmother of another very famous scholar. I'm trying to keep the time short here, otherwise we would have to talk about who is Sheikh al-Tusi and who is Sayyid ibn Tawus, because I'm about to say she was the grandmother, this daughter of Sheikh al-Tusi became the grandmother of Sayyid ibn Tawus. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details. The Sheikh al-Tusi, for those who don't know, I'm simply going to say, considered one of the main founders, if I can use that term, in a formal way, one of those who formalized the sciences in the Shia tradition. It's not that it didn't exist before him. He put it together and presented it and packaged it and wrote very significant, very authoritative works in many disciplines, to the point where many consider him to be the founder of Shi'ism. And so, two of his daughters were considered to be high-ranking scholars with ijazat. And so, now these are technical terms. Every word that I'm going to read in Arabic is taken from books of Rijal. The books of Rijal, that they try to do, is to study the lives of those who transmit narrations. So, the main concern with these books is not so much the general biography of someone. The main concern is how authentic, how reliable is this person when we see their name in a chain of transmission. So yes, we may study their life because we want to know what all of their beliefs were. And we want to know who they studied under. And we want to know if they left any works. And we want to know whether they changed their mind or converted or reverted or anything that might have any impact on the hadith is studied there. But the point is not to study the biography to study the biography. It's to study the biography to know how reliable this person is. And at the end, so that you give your conclusion, you have to be able to summarize that entire discussion that you just had about the biography of this person in a couple of words. For instance, you say fiqh. That's it. Fiqh is going to imply a lot of things. Once you know everything that is usually discussed in those studies, now the word fiqh means all of those things. Or if you say, for instance, this is what I'm going to use now, all I'm trying to say is these are not words used as we use them in Arabic. These are technical terms. When in the books of biography about these two daughters of Shaykh Tusi, they write, كانتا عالمتين فاضلتين. They were not only two scholars, the two daughters, they were not only scholars, they were distinguished scholars. That's it. That's all you need to know. Okay, so that is one description given. And specifically, we have about one of the daughters. It is said, كانت عالمة فاضلة أجازها وأختها الشيخ ابن إدريس جميع مصنفاته ومصنفات الأصحاب. So, she was a distinguished scholar who was granted authorization, who was given ijazah by who? By Shaykh ibn Idris. So anyone who has studied Shi'i fiqh, especially Shi'i fiqh, or general fiqh in Islam, but especially Shi'i fiqh, you would know who Ibn Idris is. There are two scholars, there are many scholars because it's a family of scholars and it's a city of scholars, Al-Hilla.
There are two very big names. There are a few more, but two very big names of Al-Hilli, the end with Al-Hilli. Al-Lam Al-Hilli.
As part of their biographies, that at some point Ibn Idris al-Hilli, he saw them, and of course there's now testing and evaluation and assessment of their knowledge, at the end of which he gave both of them a license, an ijazah, a certificate for their scholarship. And then they say, because this is how you give a scholarship, or you give a recognition of scholarship, you have to be very precise. What did you test them on, or what are you allowing them to do with this? So now he says, بِجَمِيعِ مُصَنَّفَاتِهِ, for all of his works. So their level of competence means that they can understand and they can teach and they can report because they have full understanding of all of his works. And I assure you that today, if you are able to understand all the works of Ibn Idris, you are a mujtahid. All of his works, and then he continues, and the works of the companions. What? مصنفات الأصحاب. Al-Ashab is a technical term, which means the Shia scholars. And all of the Shia scholars that he has ijazah for. So they are at that level of knowledge. We continue. So Ibn Idris al-Hilli, for instance, he wrote his Sara'ir. Sometimes In fiqh, they simply say so that you don't mess up, don't confuse the names, because there are too many names that are similar. They say Sahib al-Sara'ir, because he wrote a book called As-Sara'ir, which is studied, part of the main curriculum for a very long time, main curriculum in fiqh. Since we mentioned Ibn Tawus, we said one of them may, according to Al-Hurr al-Amili, he says one of them became the grandmother of. Other scholars say, no, that's not the same woman. It doesn't matter. Let's go to Ibn Tawus. So Ibn Tawus, we're going to go back in time, but now we're going a couple of centuries forward. So Sayyid Ibn Tawus lived 590 to 664 Hijri. 500s to 600s Hijri. He had 2 daughters. And so Ibn Tawus, some of the things that, there is 2 Sayyid Ibn Tawus, 2 very big scholars. There's more than that, but 2 very big scholars. One of them was a faqih. And then there is this Sayyid Ibn Tawus, who is known for, even though he was a faqih, he is known for his works on ad'iyah and ziyarat. And so many of the large books that we have today, from which many scholars compile their works of ad'iyah and ziyarat, they are actually the works of Sayyid Ibn Tawus, because his works are too big. Most people just want 1 volume, Mafatih al-Janan. So you want someone to go through these and choose the best for someone who wants to perform some rituals, some actions, good deeds in their home on a Thursday night. I don't need 72 actions, I just need 3. So a scholar like Shaykh al-Qummi will go through these works and choose what he finds to be the most authentic, reliable, relevant, important of these works and present them in a smaller volume. Many of these came from the works of Sayyid ibn Tawus. So in any case, this is the Sayyid ibn Tawus. He had 2 daughters. One of them is referred to as Sharaf, and her full name is Sharaf al-Ashraf, and the other one is Fatima. In the works of ahadith that we have, and I'm going to add something from her own life too, we have in the handwriting of Sayyid ibn Tawus himself on a copy of the Quran. One more thing I should add about Sayyid ibn Tawus is that he was also very famous for having an extremely large library, which today we may not appreciate. But at that time, year 500, 600 Hijri, this was a very significant thing, especially for a scholar, to not have to travel to find a copy of a book. And this also becomes a whole topic of study, because when you find ruwayat with Sayyid ibn Tawus that you may not find elsewhere, what do you do with them? And one of the details that are important, therefore, in his biography, yes, he was an incredible scholar. Yes, we all consider him to be reliable. But in scholarship, you want to be able to go back to that ruwaya yourself to see how reliable it is. And today, clearly, you have no access to that ruwaya. No matter where you dig, you can't find it. But then they come to this point in his biography, this detail in his biography, that he had perhaps thousands of works that are non-existent today. And he had them in his library. And that's why many of his works contain things that you don't always find in the works of many other scholars. So in any case, so many scholars are very interested in what he leaves behind, and there's also a full science of manuscripts and handwriting and so on and so forth. On a copy of the Holy Quran in which he wrote this passage, we have in his handwriting, he writes, وَقَفْتُهُ عَلَى إِبْنَتِي الحافظ للقرآن الكريم فاطمة حفظته وعمرها دون 9 سنين. So he wrote on one copy of the Quran, I have granted it, so I'm gifting this Quran, I have granted it, but he uses a fiqhi term, he says وَقَفْتُهُ. This is waqf. Just like we have in centers and mosques, for instance, if someone brings something and says this is waqf, which means that there are conditions for it to be used, and those conditions make it legitimate to use. Otherwise, no one is allowed to use it. In any case, so he says, I have granted it for the exclusive use of my daughter, the memorizer of the Holy Quran, Fatima, who memorized it while she was under 9 years old. Okay, and that's why we have in about both of the daughters of Sayyid ibn Tawus, we have in the works of biography, they say كانت عالمة, the same expression is used for both of his daughters. كانت عالمة فاضلة وحافظة للقرآن الكريم. So she was a distinguished scholar and a memorizer of the Holy Quran. So going back now to right after Sheikh al-Tusi in the 300s. We have Amina al-Alawi al-Asfahani. In Mustadrak A'yan al-Shia, they write about her. هي آمنة بنت عباد بن علي بن حمزة الطباطبائي العلوي الأصفهاني عالمة فاضلة محدثة ذات صلاح ودين من ربات الفصاحة والبلاغة. كانت من محدثات أواخر القرن الخامس ومطلع القرن السادس للهجرة في مدينة أصفهان الإيرانية. سمعت الحديث من أبي محمد رزق الله التميمي وتصدرت للتدريس بأصفهان. Okay, so who was this woman? It's just a random woman. She's also the daughter of a scholar, but a lesser known scholar today. Okay, she is Amina bint Abbad bin Ali ibn Hamza al-Tabatabai al-Alawi al-Asfahani, a distinguished scholar. So now they're talking about her, not her father. She is a distinguished scholar, a hadith transmitter, which is a completely different category than a distinguished scholar, just to be clear. A hadith transmitter of righteousness and piety. So these are not words that you just throw in a biography, in a technical biography. Okay, there are clear indications in her life of this. Okay, of righteousness and piety, and one of the masters of eloquence and speech. She was among the prominent female hadith scholars at the end of the 5th century and the beginning of the 6th century of the Hijrah in the Iranian city of Asfahan. An indication that there are many others. She is one of the prominent scholars, women scholars. There are many others. She learned hadith from so-and-so scholar, Abu Muhammad Rizqullah al-Tamimi, and became a leading figure in teaching it in Asfahan. So not only is she a scholar who learned and achieved the highest level of mastery in these fields, she was also a teacher. Shahda bint al-Adim. هي شهدة العقيلية. So now we are year 620 to 700. And she lived in Halab, Aleppo. من النساء العالمات والمحدثات في القرن السابع الهجري لها عدة إجازات في الرواية. سمعت الحديث من الكاشغري وحضرت عند عمر بن بدر بن سعيد الموصلي وانفردت بالرواية عنه. أجاز لها جماعة منهم ثابت بن شرف كانت من اللاتي يكتبن ويحفظن كثيرا وقد زهدت في الدنيا وتركت اللباس الفاخر بعد وفاة أخيها مجد الدين. I intentionally go to give you examples or samples of what you find in these biographies. Okay? It's said about her. This woman who is called Shahda bint al-Adim. She was one of the knowledgeable women and hadith scholars in the 7th century of Hijrah. She received multiple licenses, multiple ijazat in narration and learned hadith from al-Kashghari. She attended sessions with Umar ibn Badr bin Sa'id al-Mawsili and obtained exclusive narrations from him. And this becomes very key, very important when you're doing technical work. And inshallah we're going to see others. Sometimes the chain of transmission only goes through this woman. And that's it. So she has to be reliable. And without her, that chain of transmission would have been cut. Okay, a group of scholars, including Thabit ibn Sharaf, granted her ijazah. So she has multiple ijazat, multiple teachers who gave her this level of scholarship, recognized it. She was among those who wrote and memorized extensively. She became ascetic in worldly matters and abandoned luxurious clothing after the death of her brother Majduddin. Okay, so these are biographical elements of her life. Now we are in the 700s. The daughter of al-Shahid al-Awwal. For those who know a little bit of the history of Tashayyu', there are a few scholars who are simply known by these names, by these titles given to them. One of them is al-Shahid al-Awwal, one of them is al-Shahid al-Thani, and some have referred to some scholars as al-Shahid al-Thalith, and so on and so forth. Shahid al-Awwal is considered, again, one of the big pillars of our religion. Muhammad bin Makki al-Amili. So The years is 735 to about 785. He had a daughter by the name of Fatima al-Amili al-Juzaini, who was referred to as al-Hasan. And if you go back to the biographies, they also say that she was known as Sitt al-Mashayikh, the master of the teachers, the teacher of the teachers. Okay, I don't want to say the lady of the teachers because it will be misunderstood. It doesn't have the same meaning. When you say sit, it's the same word you use in Arabic, for instance, to recognize your respect towards, for instance, an elderly woman or a very respected woman. So you say, for instance, this is my sit, this is my grandmother, for instance, or my teacher. Okay, so she is the teacher of the mashayikh, the teacher of the scholars, the teacher of the shuyukh. Okay, and when he passed away, Allahi rahmah, Shaheed al-Awwal, when he passed away, he left his library to her as inheritance. He wrote in his will, my library goes to her. He had sons. The library went to his daughter. Okay, Al-Hurr al-Amili, one of the greatest scholars in the Shia world, he writes about her. So this is his biography. He writes, كانت عالمة فاضلة فقيهة صالحة عابدة سمعت من المشائخ مدحها والثناء عليها تروي عن أبيها وعن ابن معية شيخه إجازة كما تقدم في أخيها محمد وكان أبوها يثني عليها ويأمر النساء بالاقتداء بها والرجوع إليها. So first he starts with the description. He says she was a scholar, she was virtuous, she was a jurist, she was righteous, devout, and I heard, he says, so he's giving himself as the witness. He says, I have witnessed or I have heard her praise and of her competence from the scholars. Okay, so this is something well known about her rank and her scholarship. She narrated from her father, so he's her main teacher. She narrated from her father and received an ijazah from Ibn Ma'iyya, her teacher. So Ibn Ma'iyya is another scholar. And then he continues, similar commendations were bestowed upon her brother Muhammad, because he explained his biography earlier. Okay, her brother. So he's basically saying she's like her brother in scholarship, and as reliable as her brother in scholarship. Her father spoke highly of her, and when you know that her father is Shaheed al-Awwal, this is very, very significant. He spoke highly of her, instructing women to emulate her and refer to her in many matters. Okay? And then he continues, Shaheed al-Thani, so that was al-Hurr al-Amili. Now Shaheed al-Thani, another very big scholar, he writes this about her biography, في إجازته الكبيرة لوالد الشيخ البهائي الحسين بن عبد الصمد ورأيت خط هذا السيد المعظم يعني تاج الدين ابن معية بالإجازة لشيخنا الشهيد شمس الدين محمد بن مكي ولولديه محمد وعلي ولأختهما أم الحسن فاطمة المدعوة بست المشايخ. So now you have a Shaheed al-Thani talking about, he is writing in his ijazah to the father of Sheikh al-Baha'i. Again, for those who know a little bit of Shia history, we're talking about the biggest names of scholarship in the Shia world. So the father of Sheikh al-Baha'i, who was a very big scholar too, he writes in his ijazah, so he's transmitting the chain of what allows me to give this ijazah, because you always do that in your ijazah. And so he writes, and the second he writes, I have seen the handwriting of this esteemed gentleman, this great scholar, this great man, in other words, who was her scholar, and we saw her teacher, Ibn Ma'iyya. He says, I have seen the handwritten license that he granted, Ibn Ma'iyya, and the ijazah to our Shaykh al-Shaheed, Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Makki, so her father, to his two sons, Muhammad and Ali, and to their sister, al-Hasan Fatima, known as Sitt al-Mashayikh, the teacher of the teachers, or the teacher of the scholars. And so if you go into her biography, you see that thousands were those who referred to her. Basically, she was the authority. We would say today she's the marja for thousands of people living in those areas, in Sham, in Lebanon especially, and so on and so forth. Shaheed al-Awwal had 3 sons. All of them were scholars. This daughter of his was a scholar as well. And the wife of Shahid al-Awwal was also a scholar. I mentioned this very quickly. I'll make a point with it at the end. Okay, and I'm skipping. She's called Ali, and she was also considered a scholarly woman. We go to the thousands. So now we're about year 1000 to 1100. The wife of Sheikh al-Baha'i. So he lived 950 to about 1030. He was originally from Lebanon, and then he moved to Persia. Her name is not mentioned, which is another issue, by the way, digging through the biographies of these women. Many of these women are considered to be at the highest level of piety and religiousness and so on and so forth. And so they refuse to be known. They work behind closed doors, and you're going to see some of the details related to this a little bit later for at least one of them. And so not all the details come out, but enough come out that you can draw an image and understand what is going on. In this case, we don't have her name, but we have other details that I think if someone were to dig through history, you can find her name. But in any case, so her name is not mentioned, except that she is the daughter of Sheikh Ali al-Minshar. And Sheikh Ali al-Minshar only had one daughter. So anyone who can go back can look and see who is Sheikh Ali al-Minshar. He was Shaykh al-Islam. This is a very big title. This is given to someone who has memorized all of the main works and who can act as a judge and who can act as an ultimate authority in Islam. That's why today, for instance, you hear when the followers of Ibn Taymiyyah speak about him, they say, Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah. You give this title, and those who know, they know what word you're using and what title you're giving. So he was Shaykh al-Islam, her father. Okay? كان أبوها شيخ الإسلام بأصفهان. So this is an official title that he had in Asfahan. This is what we find in her biography. It said, كان في جهازها يوم زفت للشيخ البهائي, because her husband was Sheikh al-Baha'i, عدة كتب تامة في فنون العلوم. So among her belongings, so the day she was brought to Sheikh al-Baha'i as a bride, among her belongings were عدة كتب تامة, many complete works, في فنون العلوم, in the various types of knowledge or disciplines of knowledge. Which means what? Which means that she had authored these works. These were her works. It's not that she was bringing books along with her. It's that she had authored many works by the time she was getting married, keeping in mind that at that time, the age of marriage was very young. And she is coming already with a number of compilations in a variety of Islamic disciplines. And then we're told that after her father passed away, وَلَمَّا مَاتْ انتقل كل ما كان عنده من الكتب والأملاك إليها. All of his possessions were inherited by her. They went to her. Okay? And then رياض العلماء, so Abdullah al-Afandi writes, كانت تدرس الفقه والحديث ونحوهما وكانت النسوان يقرأن عليها وقد ورثت عن أبيها 4000 مجلد من الكتب. وذكر لنا بعض الأفاضل أنها وافرة العلم كثيرة الفضل وقد بقيت بعد وفاة الشيخ البهائي. So more biographical details. She taught jurisprudence or learned jurisprudence, hadith and their likes, and women used to study under her. She inherited from her father 4,000 volumes of books. Some esteemed individuals mentioned to us that she was abundant in knowledge, highly virtuous, and she remained after the death of Shaykh al-Baha'i. So that we know when did she live, when did she die, and so on and so forth. Continuing in the 1000s. Al-Fayd al-Kashani, the granddaughter of Shaykh al-Fayd al-Kashani, Mullah Muhsin al-Fayd al-Kashani. Very, very big scholar. He studied under Mullah Sadra. He married his daughter. Very, very big scholar, an amazing scholar, al-Fayd al-Kashani. So he is the grandfather of a woman by the name of Salama. So her father is Alam al-Huda, Muhammad Alam al-Huda. He's the son of al-Fayd al-Kashani, and then his daughter is this woman. It said, امرأة عالمة محدثة وأديبة شاعرة روت الحديث عن والدها وعمومتها. So a knowledgeable woman, proficient in hadith, a literary figure. She was also a poet. She narrated hadith from her father and her uncles. Now I'm gonna read the passage and then I'm gonna add a detail. In Mustadrak al-A'yan, or Mustadrak A'yan al-Shi'a, he writes, رغم صغر عمرها. So I'm gonna come back to this. إلا أنها كانت عالمة ومحدثة حيث قرأت المقدمات على يد إخوتها وأخذت الفقه والأصول عن أعمامها أبي حامد محمد المعروف بنور الهدى ومعين الدين أحمد، وتخرجت على والدها حيث كانت تروي عن والدها وأعمامها. Despite her young age, he says, despite her young age, she was a scholar and a narrator of hadith. She learned the introductory texts from her brothers and studied jurisprudence and Islamic legal theory from her uncles. And then he mentions the uncles. She received her certification from her father and narrated hadith from him and her uncles. How old was she when she died? When did she have time to do all of this? She was 26 when she passed away. And that's why he says, despite her young age. Year 1000 to 1100. Amina Khatun, or Amina Begum al-Majlisi, the daughter of a Sheikh Muhammad Taqi al-Majlisi. So the first Majlisi. Sheikh al-Majlisi, most of us, when we hear about al-Majlisi, we think about the author or the compiler of Bihar al-Anwar. Okay, the very famous, very extensive work trying to compile all of the ahadith of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. And he was a very big scholar. His father was also a very big scholar. And so this woman was actually the sister of Sheikh al-Majlisi, the author of Al-Bihar, which is important, and we're going to see something in her biography. Okay, so the father is Sheikh Muhammad Taqi al-Majlisi, and the son who compiled Al-Bihar is Sheikh Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi. The father, Sheikh Muhammad Taqi al-Majlisi, had a student, in short, Sheikh Salih al-Mazandarani. He is most known today, very big scholar, but most known for a commentary that he wrote on Kitab al-Kafi. If you look at, there are 3 big commentaries on Kitab al-Kafi. There are many, many others, but the 3 big ones, one of them is, and it's published and available, Sheikh al-Mazandarani has written one of the big commentaries on Kitab al-Kafi. He was a student of the father al-Majlisi, and therefore around the age of the son who wrote Bihar al-Anwar al-Majlisi, and he married the daughter of his teacher, Sheikh al-Majlisi. So her father, her brother, and her husband were these scholars. Okay, so she was a highly competent scholar in fiqh and hadith. She left at least 4 known works in fiqh, in Arabic grammar, poetry. She helped in the writing of Bihar al-Anwar. We don't know exactly the nature of the help, but this is on all the versions of her biography, well known that she would help her brother in the writing, the compilation, and the writing of the famous work, Bihar al-Anwar. And we're also told, if you read her biography or the biography of Sheikh, her husband, Sheikh al-Mazandarani, it is said that when he would study Qawa'id al-Ahkam, some of the works of fiqh, the most advanced fiqh, he would have difficulty understanding, so he would come to her to understand them. Okay? Here I wanted to add a couple of quick details about her life. She had either 6, I've seen both, either 6 or 7 sons. Usually, these are not mentioned when you study her life. They're mentioned when you study her husband's life. Sheikh al-Mazandarani had 6 or 7 sons. All of them were scholars. All of them were Ahl al-Ilm, advanced scholars. She had 1 daughter, and the daughter became a scholar and a faqih in fiqh, and considered a big writer, an ability to write. And her granddaughter also became a scholar, Zainab. Okay, and you see in her biography, they say she was knowledgeable, she was a mystic, and she was a woman of literature. The 1100s and the 1200s. آمنة القزويني، آمنة خانم، من النساء الشيعيات العابدات اللاتي أجيزت بالرواية، ولدت في القرن 13 للهجرة، أجازها زوجها الشيخ محمد صالح البرغاني، والشيخ أحمد الإحسائي كما وكانت لها حوزة علمية نسوية لتدريس النساء في كل من كربلاء وقزوين. So this woman, Amin al-Qazwini, was one of the devout Shia women who were authorized in narration. She was born in the 13th century after Hijrah with her husband and another Sheikh al-Ihsa'i. It's very famous. I don't want to go into his story now. Granted her authorization. Additionally, she had female religious seminaries to teach women in both Karbala and Qazwin. So she had at least two hawzat, or a network of two networks of hawzat, one in Karbala and one in Qazwin, only dedicated to teaching women religion. That's why I'm saying I'm giving you the highest samples, but from there you can see how many other women are studying with these women and under these women. Okay? And then they add حضرت آمنة القزويني دروس الفقه والأصول على زوجها وأخذت دروس الحكمة والفلسفة العالية من حوزة الملا أغا الحكمي القزويني أو الحكمي القزويني في المدرسة الصالحية، كما حضرت مجلس درس الشيخ أحمد الإحسائي في قزوين وقد أجازها زوجها الشيخ محمد صالح البرغاني وأخوها وكذلك الشيخ الإحسائي بأجازات مفصلة. So she attended jurisprudence and Islamic legal theory classes under her husband and received lessons in philosophy or advanced philosophy from the seminary of Mullah Agha al-Hakim al-Qazwini in the Salihiyya school. She also attended the teaching sessions of Sheikh Ahmed al-Ihsa'i in Qazwin, and then she received at least three different ijazat that were detailed authorizations, so basically explaining exactly what she studied and her rank and all of that. In Mustadrak A'yan al-Shi'a, كانت آمنة القزويني تقية عابدة وزاهدة متورعة، وكان زوجها يأمر النساء بالاقتداء بها والرجوع إليها في أحكام الدين، وقد كان لها حوزة تدريس للنساء عصرها في كل من كربلاء وقزوين، ولها أيضا قصيدة طويلة في 480 بيتا عن لسان السيدة زينب في حوادث كربلاء. So many of the details are the same. She was known for her piety, devotion, asceticism, righteousness. Her husband urged women to emulate her, refer to her, and learn from her all religious matters. She had a teaching seminary for the women of her time in Karbala and in Qazwin, and she also composed a long poem or an elegy of 480 verses about the events of Karbala from the perspective of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. 1200s. Fidda al-Balaghi. So the daughter of Sheikh Ahmed al-Balaghi. There's a very famous scholar in Najaf called Sheikh Jawad al-Balaghi, Muhammad Jawad al-Balaghi. He's famous for a number of reasons. One of them is because of the areas of specialization that he had in addition to fiqh and usul and so on and so forth. Anyone who was, I was much younger, interested in learning, studying about the Old Testament, the New Testament, and so on and so forth. He spoke Sheikh al-Balaghi at that time, many, many years ago. He was the teacher of Sayyid al-Khou'i, especially in Quranic sciences and tafsir. And he studied and wrote in multiple languages, at least French and English and Hebrew and Syriac. And so he would study the original scriptures of the Jews and the Christians in their original language, and he wrote his works based on that, if you read his biography. In any case, this is Sheikh Jawad al-Balaghi. This woman is his mother. Okay? So, قرأت على والدها, Sheikh Ahmed is her father, قرأت على والدها القرآن وعلوم اللغة العربية وعلى علماء أسرتها الفقه والأصول، وقد أجازوها. تولت تدريس الأصول والفقه والحديث، ويحضر في درسها بعض الطلاب، وقد قرأ عليها بعض العلماء كتاب القوانين باعتبارها مجازة من مصنفه. قال عنها السيد حسن الصدر في التكملة أنه أدركها وكانت فاضلة تكتب بالأجرة وتعيش هي وزوجها الشيخ حسن البلاغي من ذلك. كانت تستخرج المسودات إلى البياض لشدة معرفتها وحسن سوادها رضوان الله عليها، وقد كانت حسنة الخط ويوجد بعض الآثار التي كتبتها بيدها. I'm not going to have time to go through all of these quickly, so I'll just give you the gist of what is said. She learned Quran, Arabic sciences, jurisprudence, and so on and so forth. She became given certification in all of this, and then a number of scholars, which means male scholars, male ulama, would attend her classes especially in Qawaneen, because she had a special ijazah in Qawaneen, which is an advanced work of fiqh. And then Sayyid Hassan al-Sadri, he says, he found her to be, because he knew her directly, he found her to be virtuous, writing for hire. Okay, so she had a capability of writing. Does it mean she authored? I don't think so, because she was very well known for her ability to write very nicely and beautifully, which was a rare and important skill. And that's why they say in her biography that she was able to find the old manuscripts and drafts and make them into clean copies. And that's because if you know anything about this whole science, you know that it's difficult to read all the words, so you have to know exactly what the scholar is saying, if the words have been erased, if the pages have parts that are missing, and so on and so forth. What do you write there to fill the gaps, and so on and so forth. So he says they lived, her and her husband, who was a scholar, she's the daughter of a scholar, she's the mother of a scholar, they lived off of her writing. Okay, so this is how she made her living. Okay, so she possessed, it said she possessed beautiful handwriting, and there are some surviving manuscripts that she personally wrote. 1300s. Amina Shirazi, also referred to as Qira'at al-Shirazi or Durrat al-Ulama or al-Hazina. So she passed away 1341. عالمة ومدرسة من محدثات القرن الرابع عشر الهجري، اسمها أمينة، ولكنها اشتهرت باسم قراءة، وتلقب بدرة العلماء والحزينة. ولدت في شيراز وتتلمذت عند الميرزا إبراهيم المحلاتي والميرزا هداية الله الشيرازي، وقد كانت تدرس النساء الكتب الأربعة. سكنت في مدينة كربلاء في العراق. تروي عن عدد من العلماء, and they are listed. Okay, and ذكرها الشيخ السيد المرعشي النجفي. So she was known by this name, قراءات. She was a scholar, she was a teacher, one of the narrators of hadith of the 14th century, born in Shiraz, studied under a number of renowned scholars, and she taught women the 4 canonical books of Shia hadith. Okay, so this is not everyone who can just sit and teach these books. And she finally settled in the city of Karbala in Iraq, and she narrated from several scholars, and several scholars narrate from her, including Sayyid al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi. And he mentions other scholars. He's very special, Sayyid al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi. And one of his areas of specialization is Ruwaya and Rijal, by the way. Okay? In any case, he was an Asaba. He knew the lineages in history, Sayyid al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi. And so, in any case, I'm going to read another part. So, ثريا محسني, she was عالمة فاضلة من محدثات القرن الرابع عشر. حضرت عند الميرزا محمد الهندي دروس الفقه والأصول والحديث، وكانت تروي عنده. سكنت في كربلاء المقدسة، وكانت تقوم بتدريس بعض النساء في الفقه والأصول والحديث. أورد اسمها السيد المرعشي النجفي ضمن الذين يروي عنهم في كتابه الإجازة الكبيرة. So this is another woman by the name of Thuraya Muhsini. She was a distinguished scholar, one of the narrators of hadith, attended the lessons of jurisprudence, principles of jurisprudence, hadith, under so-and-so scholars, and she used to narrate from them. She resided in the holy city of Karbala. She taught some women jurisprudence, principles of jurisprudence, and hadith. Her name is mentioned by Sayyid al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi, Nusrat al-Amin. This is perhaps one of the most impressive ones. I'm racing against time. In short, صاحبة تفسير مخزن العرفان عالمة وفقيهة ومحدثة شيعية من أعلام القرن الرابع عشر الهجري. أخذت إجازتها من عدة علماء. There's 4 big scholars who gave Sayyida Nusrat her ijazah. So she was born year 1308 Hijri and passed away year 1403. So about 40 years ago. She's the author of the interpretation of the Quran, Makhzan al-Irfan. To my knowledge, I don't know, this needs to be more digging. This is the first woman in Islam who writes a full, complete commentary of the Holy Quran. And it's in 15 large volumes. And it's printed. It's in Persian, but it's printed and available. It's been reprinted in multiple editions now. It's very irfani and very akhlaqi. In any case, she was a Shiite scholar, a jurist, a narrator. She obtained her authorization from several very prominent scholars. I'm skipping. Okay, and قد قامت أيضا بإعطاء إجازة في الرواية لعدة علماء. So many scholars would come to her to receive an ijazah, and she gave an ijazah to multiple scholars, including Sayyid al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi, and he lists that in his ijazat. By the age of 40, so this woman lived almost 100. By the age of 40, she had completed all of her studies, and she was tested. She wrote, or she was tested by a number of scholars. At least 4 of them gave her the full ijtihad when they tested her. And they're big, all of them are the 4 ijazat that I know of. All of them are written by scholars who are all of themselves maraja. Okay? And one of her teachers, Sheikh Najaf Abadi, he says that she never left her home. She lived her entire life inside her house. She refused to leave the house unless for extreme necessity. He says when she was still studying under him, he heard that one of her youngest children passed away. And so he was sure, he writes, he was sure that she would either stop her studies at that time or at least take a long time to mourn and recover. But she sent him a message 2 days later asking to continue the lessons. After her ijazat, she spent the second half of her life teaching, and her house in Asfahan became a school for women and girls wanting to learn religion. And some of the scholars would write to her asking her opinions on religious matters, including tafsir, including hadith. One of them is Sayyid al-Tabatabai, who wrote Tafsir al-Mizan. Okay? There's a lot more here. قال عنها السيد شهاب الدين المرعشي. So this is now Sayyid al-Mar'ashi, who went to her to get a license from her. He writes in his الإجازة الكبيرة: العالمة الجليلة المحدثة المتكلمة الفقيهة الأصولية والحكيمة ذات المؤلفات الكثيرة. So in this part he says the venerable scholar, the knowledgeable in hadith, the articulate jurist in principles of jurisprudence, the wise author of numerous works. And then he has another work called مسلسلات الإجازات. He writes: هذه المرأة الجليلة تعد من نوابغ عصرنا وأغاليظ الدهر، ألفيتها عالمة متبحرة في العقليات والسمعيات، وأمر هذه الشريفة مما يقضى منه العجب في هذا العصر، فهي فريدة العصور ونادرة الدهور، حجة على نساء العصر وآية لبارئ الدهر، والغريب في أمرها مع قيامها بأمر الزوجية وإدارة المنزل وتربية الأطفال نالت هذه المراتب السامية العالية. So he wrote in his book, this noble woman is among the prodigies of our era and the gems of the time. She is a learned scholar, well versed in all intellectual and scriptural disciplines. Her status in this era is astonishing, and she stands out uniquely, a rare gem of the ages, a proof among the women of her time, or for the women of her time, and a sign from the Creator. What is remarkable about her is that while managing marital affairs and household responsibilities and raising children, she has attained all of these lofty ranks. I should wrap it up. These were some of the samples that I wanted to go through. There are many, 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 many others. A quick word that at least, alhamdulillah, there have been some attempts in recent times to start compiling and putting together works about these types of women in the history of Islam to make this history shine through and become a lot clearer in the type of role that women have played in Islamic history throughout the ages. All the women that we went through are prominent scholars in the Shia tradition. On the Sunni school, there are also volumes upon volumes written. In the Shia school, there are a few works. If you're interested, I can share them later. None of them are too voluminous. Some of them are a few volumes, but they go in very detailed biographies. Sayyid al-Khu'i has maybe 130, 40 biographies in his Mu'jam al-Rajal. There's a work that has been published recently in English that has around 210, I believe, biographies of these women. And there's a book in Arabic by the name of A'lam al-Nisa al-Mu'minat. It has 405 biographies. If I turn my attention to, very quickly, if I wanted to turn my attention to a scholar in the Sunni school. Sheikh Muhammad Akram al-Nadwi, or al-Nadawi. He's a dedicated scholar of hadith who has spent a lot of time studying the biographies of the transmitters of hadith, especially who are women. And he has two very important publications. One of them he published a few years ago, 2007. It's simply called Al-Muhaddithat, The Women Scholars in Islam. I want to read this little passage. This is a point that I wanted to make. I won't spend more time explaining it. I think it's clear. He writes, I have worked through much material over a decade to compile biographical accounts of 8,000 muhaddithat. I'm going to add a comment here. Keep that number in mind. This was in 2007 when he was publishing this. No one of them is reported to have considered the domain of family life inferior, or neglected duties therein, or considered being a woman undesirable or inferior to being a man, or considered that given aptitude and opportunity, she had no duties to the wider society outside the domain of family life. That's a one-volume work that appeared in English in 2007. Recently, I believe in 2021, he published his full work of these 8,000. In fact, the number grew to 9,700 biographies. The work is called Al-Wafa bi Asma' al-Nisa. It's in 43 volumes, where he goes through the biographies, of course from the Sunni perspective, but he goes through the biographies of 9,700 women who are all considered scholarly experts in the transmission of hadith throughout the history of Islam. Inshallah, with this we wrap up. We'll try to reconnect the dots the next time we meet, but with this we wrap up the topic about the who, just to make sure that there is no ambiguity, there are no misunderstandings, there is no misconceptions around the relationship between woman and knowledge and reason in Islam. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.